Hello, welcome everyone. This is the International Peace Coalition. My name is Anastasia Battle. I'll be your moderator today, as well as Dennis Small and Dennis Speed co-moderating. This is our 92nd meeting that we've had in a row, and I want to thank all of the regular people who have been joining us from all over the world, leaders of different organizations, diplomats, various representatives of many different organizations. And also new people who have joined us today. We created this forum 92 weeks ago in order to unite the peace movement across the globe, because quite frankly, many different coalitions have broken down and become quite dysfunctional. And if we're actually going to achieve true peace on the planet, we need to bring people together above their ideologies in order to accomplish this. So we've been coordinating for 92 weeks, which is quite an accomplishment. We have an opening panel of very interesting people, which I'll post the agenda again in the chat for people on the Zoom to see. If you are on over YouTube or Rumble or any other platform, you can go to the schillerinstitute.com to register for this meeting today and get the Zoom link and participate. But with that, I'd like to have Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the founder of the Schiller Institute and the initiator of the International Peace Coalition, to start us off today. Please go ahead, Helga.
Yes, good day. Hello. Well, we are in a truly dramatic turmoil where almost every day you have a new earthquake. It is not clear yet where this will go, but it's amazing. Now, while the situation around Ukraine has been in the forefront for the last weeks, especially after Zelenskyy's dramatic appearance in the White House last Friday, things are really going completely haywire. Now, the European reaction to President Trump's insistence that he wants to bring the Ukraine war to an end is an amazing one. There was over the weekend or a couple of days ago, a special EU Council meeting where Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the EU Commission, announced that they approved 800 billion euros for something called Rearm Europe plan. Now, this is supposed to be voted at for good at the next formal European Council meeting on the 21st of March. That's an enormous sum, $800 billion euros, but that is not enough, because in the meantime, the designated new Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz, managed in 1 week to make a 108-degree reversal, because before he was elected, he had promised and told the voters many times that the CDU would be against a change in the so-called debt brake. The debt brake is a mechanism whereby it's written into the German constitution that the government cannot bypass a certain limit in terms of new credits, so-called debt brake. Now, he said that because there are extraordinary circumstances, that has to be abandoned, and therefore he is now proposing to have a military budget of 400 billion euros, and in addition 500 billion euros for infrastructure. But that 400 billion is not a cap, but he said he will do whatever it takes. And this is an obvious reference to the famous remarks by Mario Draghi in the middle of the Euro crisis, where he said that the European Central Bank would mobilize whatever liquidity was necessary, whatever it takes to save the euro. So he is using that now, which means an open-ended determination to fund the rearmament of Germany. So you have the EU, 800 billion, you have Germany, 400 billion open-ended. And this, as I said, is a 180-degree change in 1 week. And, I mean, the guy just won the election with the promise that he would not change that. And that is why many people, voters, supported him, and even many people in the CDU itself, because they oppose the idea of the Social Democrats and the Greens to just lose up the debt brake for whatever investments. Now, obviously, even Bild Zeitung, which is the largest tabloid in Germany, on page 3 today has a whole page of people quoted expressing the fact that they think this is a betrayal of the voter, because if Merz does 1 week after the vote exactly the opposite of what he was running as a candidate, I mean, that's clearly a betrayal. Now, what is the pretext of all of this? Obviously, the reaction to the fast sequence of events, first the speech by Hexes in Brussels, then the speech by Vice President Vance at the Munich Security Conference, where he blamed the European Union of not having any democracy, no free speech, followed then naturally by the meeting between Foreign Minister Lavrov and Secretary of State Rubio in Riyadh, and then the discussion between Putin and Trump on the telephone. And then naturally, topping it all, the freak out in the Oval Office when Zelenskyy visited there, and he got into a shouting match with Trump and Vance, and then was kicked out of the White House more or less unceremoniously. And, this is now, followed by a whole bunch of events. Zelenskyy immediately went from the White House to London, where he was received with open arms by Keir Starmer. And, everybody, Macron threatening to send French troops into Ukraine to open the French nuclear umbrella for all of Europe. This has been answered immediately by Foreign Minister Lavrov, who said that the proposals by Macron to send troops into Ukraine are absolutely unacceptable. This would be the equivalent of, it would be the direct deployment of NATO against Russia, and obviously would have appropriate consequences. Now, what has happened is, that obviously the Europeans were so much dead set on their entire strategy of ruining Russia, of causing a strategic defeat for Russia, which has been the litany for the last almost 3 years, that they cannot adjust themselves to the idea that Trump would say, let's end this war and let's have an agreement with Russia. Now, obviously, the Europeans at no point had any effort to solve the conflict through diplomacy. They at no point proposed to negotiate anything, and they always were only talking that Ukraine must win on the battlefield, Russia must be defeated, and that was their only mantra. So now that they are confronted with this action by Trump, which is not yet settled, it's just in the first baby steps of negotiation. Now, naturally, many things have followed. Trump has stopped sending military equipment to Ukraine, maybe only for a pause. Somebody said this is and cutting also Ukraine off military intelligence. Somebody said, this is like using a 2x4 against a mule just to get the intention, and it's not meant forever, but in any case, this is what happened. Naturally, there are also threats that the United States may cut intelligence sharing with the British and the Five Eyes, which obviously would, it has completely created a new situation, because the entire nuclear arsenal of the British are only operational with US support, technical support, intelligence support, and they are not usable independently. It's only the French nuclear arsenal which has some kind of sovereign or independent ability to function. Now, what this whole thing has caused, it has caused an unprecedented and on the surface, almost you can't almost understand it, a reaction by the Europeans to say this is a complete severing of the Western alliance. Now Europe is on its own. Now Europe has to go for its own defense. We cannot rely on the United States any longer. And, it is like an almost complete break. Now, Keir Starmer, obviously, at the EU summit in London, they realized, obviously running around like chickens without a head, they realized that militarily, the European Union plus the British who are not in the European Union are not militarily fit to be on their own without NATO. And obviously the fact that they are still in NATO means even the French probably cannot freely use their nuclear arsenal without permission of the NATO structure in general. Also, now many reports are coming out, for example, from the Kieler World Economic Institute, which basically say that the condition of the German army is absolutely ludicrous. For example, they say to get back to the level of the Bundeswehr even existing in 2004, to get the same number of fighter jets, you would need 15 years. To get back to the level of tanks, you need 40 years. And to have a similar amount of howitzers, you would need 100 years. Now, obviously, this is a mute question. So that's why they go for this massive military armament program of the figures I mentioned in the beginning. And there one has to say, if they want to now finance this kind of military rearmament, both on a European level, but also on a German level, and it's up to the other countries how much they want to do, this cannot be financed within the budget. And therefore, they want to create this separate mechanism, it has a historic precedent. And these are the MEFO bills by Hjalmar Schacht. That is how, Schacht managed to get the armament industry going again. And there are now appearing various articles, among others in the British press, who say, oh yeah, that's how the United States got out of the Depression. It was not the New Deal, it was the war mobilization. And that is a very common routine. What these people leave out to mention is that then the logical outcome of this MEFO bill kind of mobilization was to go to war, because you cannot realize that bubble in actual terms, physical economic terms, but only when you go for a complete destruction in a war. And that is what is looming, and that is the danger, and that is what we have to mobilize against, to get something completely different on the agenda, because if this continues, you can only have a complete catastrophe. Now, obviously, that is not a uniform approval by the Europeans. First of all, within the different countries, many people are waking up to the enormity of what is happening. It's not yet 100% clear that the new coalition of Merz can be created, because some people in the social democracy have stomach ache about this kind of rearmament. Even some of the CDU people are very critical. But naturally, Orban, the prime minister of Hungary, was the only one who voted against this, basically, expressing his veto against such an armament. And he said, this by far goes beyond the means of the European Union to do this. But I think this is really something the world has to take into consideration as a strategic cause for alarm of the highest priority, because, the historic precedent is Hjalmar Schacht, and people should look in history to recognize what was the outcome of such a mobilization. Now, the reason is obvious, that the European establishment is so freaked out about Trump because he represents a discontinuity to the previous imperial policies. And since they have not yet reviewed the fact that, if they would be, why is Trump elected? Because the American voters rejected the policies which went along with this unipolar world domination, globalization in all of its aspects. And, if the Europeans would be smart, which they obviously are very far away from being, they would reflect on the fact that Trump got elected because of the policies of the previous administrations, especially, the Obama-Biden continuity. And, rather than drawing the conclusion that if they don't shape up and if they don't correct the policy failures, they can maybe hold on to power for a very, very short period of time, but it for sure will fuel similar opposition in all the European countries, from Geert Wilders to Meloni to Le Pen to the AfD. And naturally, there are many such movements in many other countries as well. So it's a completely short-sighted, stupid reaction, but it represents the fact that these policy elites in Europe are not willing and not capable to reflect on the policy failure of the policy of the last 35 years following the end of the Cold War and the attempt to establish an unipolar world with all the predicates that implies. So that means we have a very, very dramatic situation in Europe. And just to mention, not to say that it's not equally severe and dramatic, to mention what is happening in Southwest Asia, we had the rather important and successful summit in Cairo on the 5th of March, or on the 4th rather, where a Gaza reconstruction plan was decided. Egypt has committed itself to now organize a large all-Arab conference for the realization of this plan. So that is a baby step in the right direction, in the direction of the Oasis plan. But on Gaza itself, it looks very dire, because now for the 6 days, the IDF is again practically blockading the Gaza, not letting in food, humanitarian aid, and other equipment. And naturally, that is leading again to enormous war crimes and crimes against humanity, as was just stated by a UN official in the situation. Now, we have to renew our efforts to put the Oasis plan as part of a new international security and development architecture on the table. And there, because of the direness of the situation, we are encountering a lot of Palestinians who are telling us, forget the Oasis plan, we need justice, we need a two-state solution, and everything else doesn't count. And I think we have argued in this discussion of the IPC many times why that is not functioning, because you don't get a two-state solution if you don't change the entire dynamic of the region and beyond that of the entire strategic situation worldwide, which is eminently possible because China is offering the equivalent of a new security architecture. Putin has said in a recent discussion he had with the FSB that he now sees the potential for a European security and even global security system. So these options are on the horizon, but they require determined steps to be taken by us and other people who are trying to preserve peace. Lastly, the Vatican representative at the United Nations has again made a dramatic appeal to the world community to seize this warmongering warning of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and appealing to the world to go in a different direction. And one would wish that especially those parties who have a C in their name, like the Christian Democrats, that they would listen to this. So I think this is where we are at, and I think we need to absolutely escalate our mobilization for the new paradigm, because, as you can see, the split of the Western alliance as it is now, as it has occurred, does not solve the problem, but it tends to increase the danger.
Thank you, Helga, for that. And what you went through is exactly the reason why we created this forum, so we can see the interlocking and interacting dynamic happening in the world, how what's happening in Ukraine is actually interacting with what's happening in Palestine. So this is very important. Thank you for that, Helga. I actually would like to bring on Dr. Muhammad Dajani, who's the founder of, and pardon if I'm mispronouncing this name, of the Wasita movement, Palestine, and director of the Wasita Graduate Academy Institute. Thank you so much for joining us and all the work that you do. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. Let me express my deep appreciation for having inviting me to speak to you and to address you. It is very important. I understand that I have 10 minutes in the beginning. Is that so?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So that I would be able to, in these minutes that I have, I would like to share narratives or events that I experienced through my journey for peacemaking, because I was not a peacemaker to start with. I was a revolutionary who believed in us or them, and joined the military organization Fatah at the time in order to achieve, through armed struggle, the liberation of Palestine. And then I was not allowed to come back to Palestine between 1967 to 1993. And when I came back, I was allowed to come back because my father had cancer, and I was allowed to come back. It was a totally important experience for me, because in that I started to see the human side of my enemy, and I had experiences in which I went with my father to an Israeli hospital where he was treated there, and I saw Jewish doctors and nurses treating Palestinians, and that opened my eyes to the other, to see the humanity in the other, and to think in terms of how important it is for us to look at the other and see the person in the other. And so that helped me to navigate through my peace journey. I want to share with you the two narratives that also impacted my journey. One was in 1998, where I was invited to be a facilitator for a Palestinian-Israeli peace dialogue. And it was for teachers of Hebrew and Islamic religion, for the Palestinians teaching Islam and the Jews teaching Judaism. And in that meeting, both in the beginning were refusing to listen to each other. They were sitting each on the other side, and each saying, "This land is mine." The Jews saying, "God gave this land to me," and the Palestinians saying that we have been here before you. And it seemed that it was a monologue. No one was listening to the other. And I remember the quote by Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish, in which he said, what is more important, a big dream or a small hope? So I threw that on the table, asking what is more important, a big dream or a small hope? At the time, I didn't have any idea where that will lead me, but yet it helped cool the tension in the room, and eventually I explained my own interpretation of what is a big dream or a small hope, where the big dream is the maximalist wants to the land from river to sea without the other, where they can have their capital and their temple. And also on the other side, the Palestinians wanting to have an Islamic state from river to sea without the other. And so the only problem with that dream is that there are millions of people on one side and millions of people on the other side. What do you want to do with them? You want to annihilate them, or do you want to eradicate them, or do you want to throw them in the sea or throw them in the desert? And nobody wanted to do that. So we moved from the big dream to the small hope, where they both can share the land, river to sea, and have peace. And that helped navigate the discussion, because neither of them wanted to be called that they support the big dream, because it's a maximalist without the other. And in this way, we felt that this became a model of big dream, small hope, where the maximalists who do not want to share the land are fighting to build a Jewish state from river to sea, and the maximalists on the other side, the Islamic movement, who wanted to build an Islamic state from river to sea without the other. And this actually is not, it's a fantasy, and it's an evil fantasy. Why? Because it means that you want to eradicate the other, or subjugate the other, or enslave the other. And that's not within the human boundaries. And so this is where I started this idea, this conflict resolution model, where it is the rather than having Israelis and Palestine against Palestinians and Palestinians against Israelis, but having Palestinians and Israelis for the small hope against Israelis and Palestinians for the big dream, or those Palestinian Israelis in the camp of peace against the Israelis and Palestinians in the camp of war. And unfortunately, the camp of war so far has been winning, and we can see that in the October attack on Israel and Israeli response to that, which aims at expanding the gap between both Palestinians and Israelis. And our work is to narrow that gap. And how to do that? I was inspired in a way to working on that on a Friday morning in Ramadan, and back in 2006, where I was standing on the balcony of my office overlooking an Israeli checkpoint, and it was Ramadan like this month here, and it was Friday like today, and it was 11 in the morning, and there were hundreds of Palestinians pushing against an Israeli checkpoint, wanting to go to Jerusalem to pray. And the Israelis were stopping them because they didn't have permits, and throwing at them tear gas and pushing them back. And I assumed that they will shoot at them. However, after a while, the Israeli officer made a deal with the people, where the Israelis brought buses to the checkpoint, searched the people crossing the checkpoint, and the buses took them to Jerusalem to pray. They prayed, and then the buses brought them back. And I thought those are Muslims, and but moderate. They are not extremists. And the Israelis at the same time were also moderate. They did not go to the extreme. And in this way, it was a win-win situation for both. And that helped me develop an idea that is from the Quran, from the Islamic teachings of wasatiyah, which is means moderation and tolerance. And it is a verse in the second chapter of the Holy Quran, Al-Baqarah Surah, where in verse 142 it says, God will guide us to the right path. And verse 143 says, and thus God created you a temperate nation, a moderate nation, a middle ground. 3 is the middle of the whole chapter, which is 286 verses. So God was guiding us to the meaning of that verse. And I adopted that verse and started a movement that called for moderation, titled Wasatiyah movement. And the idea is to create a culture of moderation within Palestine and within Israel, so that both communities can be able to chant from river to sea, Palestine and Israel will be free from hatred, free from prejudice, free from intolerance, free from enmity and violence. And that's the whole concept. I believe in education, and I believe that religion can be part of the solution. And in this way, if we can create a moderate culture, it will help us. And I find the pillar for that is education, and the source for that is education. It's a long process, it might take, but basically we need to start with the children, teaching them about peace, and that's where I began to focus on curriculum education in Palestine. Unfortunately, the curriculum in Palestine does not, and in Israel does not promote peace and reconciliation but and thus we tend to find young kids growing up with hatred, with violence, with enmity. And also the problem is not only in terms of politics, but also religion, because unfortunately the Quran is being interpreted and being taught to be anti-Israel, anti-Palestine, anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish, and in this way, anti-other, whether Christian or Muslim, or whether Christian or Jews or non-Muslim. And this is not the message of the Quran. This is not the message of what we are being taught, whether in Judaism, Christianity, Islam, or any other religion, Buddhism and others. What we are focusing now in our work is to teach our children how to be peaceful, how to live in peace, and how to coexist, how to be tolerant, compassionate, have mercy, and show empathy for the other. And in order, also as part of that, I took my students back in 2014 to Auschwitz to learn about and get an education about the Holocaust, which costed me my job and my security. But yet, I believe that we have to show empathy for the suffering of the other. We look today at what is happening in Gaza, and unfortunately, that this particularly what is happening in terms of the violence and the killing, and that moved also to Lebanon and to the West Bank, to Syria, to other places. But we look and hope that to leave the past behind, to leave the present, and in the midst of conflict, plant seeds of peace. And in this way, we can learn a lot. When I was young, when I was in the first grade, I was taught a story about a king who was walking in the fields, and then he saw an old man planting an olive tree, and he wanted to tease him. So he told him, "Old man, do you expect to eat from the fruit of this tree?" And it takes 50 years to have fruits. And the old man responded, "Our grandparents planted, we ate, and we plant so that our grandchildren will eat." So basically, I learned later, 20 years later, that, or more than that, that this is a story from the Talmud. And so we share a lot of wisdom between us, and we need to learn from us. Islam did not come to eradicate other religions, but rather to complement them, and in this way, and to uh, empower the message of God, which is basically in the Ten Commandments, which is within the realm of all religions. And in that, the Quran tells us, in that in which we differ, God will judge among us on Judgment Day. So basically, we can live together in sharing the values that we have, and in that in which we differ, God will judge among us on Judgment Day. And in this way, to move on with to work together, to cooperate together, and to be able to peacefully live in for the, if not for us, for the future, for the future. That's why when people ask me why are you optimistic in the midst of all this pessimism regarding this darkness and this evil and this violence that's taking place, I say I'm not focused on the past or the present, but rather on the future. And
Yes.
I hope that, and I believe that the past went, the present will go, and the future, whatever we plant today, we will reap in the future. And that's why if we plant seeds of peace today, we will reap seeds of peace. If we plant thorns, we should not expect to have flowers. And that's where I believe that we need to cooperate together and live with each other as human beings, and
Exactly.
to look at the other and see the human side of the other.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dajani, for that, and the principles that you're bringing to the table and what you've been doing all of these years. We very much appreciate what you're bringing to the table here right now. And thank you again for that presentation. We're already getting some responses from people in the chat, but we'll continue with the outline, and then we'll come back. And next, I'd like to go to Garland Nixon, who is a veteran progressive radio and television show host, and also a absolutely amazing polemicist in looking at the overview of politics in the world. Thank you so much for joining us, Garland. Oh, you're muted, my friend.
All right, there we go.
There we go.
Thank you. I'll be brief. For those of you who don't know me, I've been doing radio since 2000. A little bit of my background, I worked with Representative John Conyers' office for a while on some things on Capitol Hill. My actual political mentor, was Paul Robeson Jr. for many years, and I still have many connections on Capitol Hill, and I regularly. Not regularly, but I speak with and interview Russian Ambassador Dmitry Polyansky. I've worked with Sputnik for years, and I have still have a lot of connections. So let me just throw out some of the things that are being discussed in some of the circles that I'm hearing around DC. Some things that I'm throwing out, some things I'm hearing back, etc. Number one, and that is, so the big Zelenskyy blow up in the office, and of course, what appears to be some enmity, shall we say, between the U.S. and Europe. Okay, so I've had a discussion like this. I'll throw these tidbits out there and you can do what you want with them. So one of the things happening now is the US has decided, this is obviously a massive defeat for NATO, and they've decided to spin that into a victory. I could get into that quite in depth, but I won't. But so meanwhile, in Europe, the Europeans, they bet the bank on it. They don't really have the ability to do that. They have a continuity of government. So their governments that come in have the exact same policies. They don't have the ability to say, we have a brand new government with completely different things. So this new government is going to change everything and go in a different direction. They're locked into that. So the Trump administration is working to do that. One of the things that's becoming obvious about NATO and about this Ukraine conflict is NATO is, shall we say, an imperial project with a division of labor, shall we say, in Ukraine. Okay, the MI6, you know, their old British Empire specialty of going in and dividing the locals into different camps and setting up puppet governments. And boy, they're really good at that. Of course, the French mercenaries, that's what they're really good at, where they'll bring and manage the mercenaries. And of course, the US provides the military punch and the muscle. One of the things that's becoming obvious is that Zelenskyy is an MI6, that he is very much a Brit Imperial MI6 project. As an example, MI6, what happened, and a big part of this is the MI6 doing the, as I'm saying, I'm not saying this is right or wrong. I'm saying these are the discussions that are being had, okay? That, who was it that went in and killed the Istanbul? It was Bojo. Who is he compared to? Churchill. As another example is, he was guarded by MI6. They left. Now he's guarded by France. That's the French intelligence. And when he got punched around a little bit by Trump, he goes right to London and they hug him. That he is, that part of the project is where Zelenskyy was. That's his base. That's his power base, is the MI6 part of it. And so now what we have is like any project, I have to have all three parts of this division of labor. The muscle part of the division of labor is now saying that we want out. We don't like this. We don't want out. We want out. There is a, for lack of a better way to put it, an advantage, a positive side for those of us who are working towards peace, for those of us who are working against these kind of projects around the world and who want peaceful resolutions, and certainly want a peaceful resolution in Europe, because it's very, very dangerous right now with what's happening with the European leadership. Although they do understand that they can't continue the project without the muscle, without the gorilla in there to punch, to keep punching on the Russians. And that is, a couple of things are happening that people who aren't plugged in here or aren't watching social media here may not pick up. Elon Musk is a big part of this because he has social media. So what happens? He's starting to release tidbits. For instance, he started pushing a lot of videos that are showing these oppressive and aggressive kidnappings of Ukrainians to press them into service on the front line. So that's information that's very, very important that's starting to get out to the masses. Now, certainly the Musk people have their own reasons for doing it. The Trump people have their reasons for doing it, but it's information that we have that we can relate to the masses in our quest to bring a peaceful resolution to this, number one. Number two, something else that's critical right now, that if people in this on this Zoom have an opportunity to grab, to push forward, to work on also, Elon Musk is now on Twitter. They're pushing videos of a U.S. congressman named Chris Murphy. And what they're replaying is, I believe, somewhere around 2016, 17, 19, somewhere in there, there's a video of him not just admitting, but, you know, actively arguing in a proud way that the U.S. was behind Maidan, that it couldn't have happened without us. So the admission that this was in fact a U.S. Overthrow of the government, rather than as they said, called it a revolution of dignity. So Musk is putting that video out there, pushing that, which again, that's very good information for those of us who are pushing an anti-war agenda to say, okay, the elephants are fighting, but we're getting some great information. Add this. During one of the things that might have been missed, particularly during the Trump-Zelenskyy blow-up, and Donald Trump said, I provided javelins. That's very important, because what is that? Donald Trump is now admitting, hey, you know, I kind of had a hand in this thing. Again, one of the things they're trying to do is just simply, and I'm not totally against it, to get this conflict over, but one of the things they're working on is, this is just Joe Biden screwed up. Was not an imperial project of NATO to take out Russia and steal all their resources. No, no, no. The evil Biden administration just made some bad errors, or, you know, a bad move. And so we need to bring the United States back in line to our really good and wonderful policies after the Biden administration did something bad and screwed up. Well, Trump admitted, I gave him javelins. In a moment of thoughtlessness, I guess, he admitted his complicity in this. But that's not to go after Donald Trump. That's just to simply say, those of us who are arguing against these massive conflicts around the world, and next there could be China or wherever, and certainly in the Middle East, we're pushing to stop this kind of violence. It helps us to make the argument that the plans are much more grand than simply, this is what happened since February 2022, or this was Joe Biden. It was an individual president that did it, or an individual decision made by Vladimir Putin. It helps us to argue the complexity of these things with these little tidbits of information. So I think my point here, I had another note. Additionally, another very, very important tidbit of information that has come out, and that is the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, recently said, this is a proxy war. Again, for those of us who are pushing to end this and to ensure that these things don't happen in the future, certainly there's the issue of Taiwan, right? And one could make an argument that to an extent that Israel, being a U.S. colony, is a proxy war against the Muslim world and against the region that it's in, to say the least. These are things that we can utilize to support our arguments that there are proxy wars, because needless to say, the people in power are going to argue there are no proxy wars. What are you talking about? We're just over here standing up for independence and democracy against the bad guys, or terrorism, whatever the case may be. More often than not, pretty much most of the time, on some level, these are proxy wars. So when in this battle between the U.S. attempt to rewrite the script and the narrative on this conflict, and to get out of it, and to spin this as a massive victory, economic victory. We're getting money, we're getting resources, and we'll get minerals and things like that, is all an attempt to spin the narrative. Well, I might not necessarily push against that narrative in some ways, because I want the conflict to end, but it does give us a lot of ammunition and a lot of information in our quest to push against war, to push against conflict, to push against these kind of imperial conflicts with NATO, et cetera. And so I think we can utilize the information we get from the fight between the giants for our long-term quest for peace and prosperity.
Thank you, Garland. Always a pleasure to have you on and have your analysis. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
For that overview. Actually would like to bring on, and just to make sure everybody who's on the Zoom, make sure that you have interpretation selected on the bottom of your screen. But we're going to be bringing on Miguel Cabrera. He is a former professor, a retired professor from the Dominican Republic, a journalist and author, and currently the host of the weekly TV program, Science, Technology, and Society. Thank you so much for joining us, Miguel. You're muted there, my friend. Hola, you're muted.
¿Se escucha ahí?
Now, can you hear me?
¿Se escucha?
Can you hear me?
Muy bien.
Good.
Decía que
What I
muchas
was saying
gracias
is
por
thank
la
you very
oportunidad
much
que me
for
da
the
el
opportunity
Instituto Chile
which the Schiller Institute
y
is giving me,
especial esta
and
novena
especially
exilio.
this
Ya
this
vamos por la
this
92
is like the
reunión de
92nd
la
meeting
Coalición
of
Internacional
the
por la Paz.
International Peace
Eso
Coalition.
es un logro que hemos
That's an
alcanzado
achievement
llegar
which
a
we
estas
have
92
brought
semanas
about to carry this out for
reunidos
92
y
straight weeks, to
analizando,
meet,
luchando
to
por la
analyze
paz,
and fight
la
for
paz en
peace,
el mundo que
for
tanto requiere
peace
de
in the world,
nosotros, de todos
because it
los
really depends on us and
continentes
it
y del
depends on
mundo
all of us from
entero,
the entire
que
world,
nos
all the continents and all
dediquemos
the worlds.
a
We must
luchar por
all
la
dedicate
paz, a
ourselves to fight
defender
for
los
peace,
intereses
to defend
de
the
la
interests
humanidad, como
of
lo estamos
humanity
haciendo.
as a whole, as we are now
Hay dos
doing. There are
acontecimientos
two developments
que quiero
which
analizar
I want to
y que
analyze and
requieren
which
todo
require
lo que ha sido un
a
análisis de la
required
situación
analysis
mundial
of the
en la
world
actualidad.
situation
En
today.
este caso, la
In this,
importancia de las
one is
discusiones
the
entre
important of
Trump y
the
Putin
discussions
acerca de
between
la
Trump and
paz
Putin with
en
regard to peace
Ucrania,
in
pero
Ukraine.
también
But
otro
also,
tema que
second
es el
matter
plan
is
Oasis
the
para
Oasis
Oriente Medio,
plan
porque
for
esos
the Middle
dos
East.
temas
These two
son de
subject
gran
matters
actualidad
are
y
of great
mantienen a
current
las
importance
sociedades
and is
en vilo a ver qué es lo que va a
highly
suceder,
relevant for
porque de ahí
societies
depende
to see what
el
happens on this,
futuro de la
because the
humanidad.
future of
La
humanity
humanidad está en
depends on
peligro,
this.
se encuentra en peligro
We are now
de
facing a
extinción
danger
por
of
la
extinction
posible enfrentamiento,
through
la
a
posibilidad de que
possible
haya la tercera guerra
confrontation, the
mundial.
danger of a
Y en
third
ese
world war.
sentido,
And in that regard,
se ha visto
we
una
have
luz al final
seen
del
a
túnel,
light
es
at the
decir,
end of the
ya
tunnel. That is
con
to
la
say,
llegada
with the
en enero
arrival in
al poder,
January
al gobierno de Donald Trump,
of Donald Trump to the presidency
desde
of the United
antes de
States,
llegar al poder
even before he
y
came into
juramentarse,
office
ya
and
estaba
before he was
diciendo
sworn
y
in, he was
expresando
saying
su
and was
deseo
expressing his
de
desire
comunicarse con
to
Putin y llegar a
have
acuerdos con
communications with
Rusia
Putin and to reach an
para
agreement
poner
with
fin a
Russia
ese
to put
conflicto
an
tan
end to
peligroso
that
que
extremely
amenazaba la
dangerous
paz
conflict,
mundial
which is
y
threatening
que
world
era en
peace.
cierta medida
And that is, to a certain
instigado
degree, a conflict
por
instigated
Europa, los
by
gobiernos
Europe, by
europeos
the
de la
European
OTAN
governments,
y
by
también
NATO,
por
and
la
also
administración anterior
by the
del Partido
previous
Demócrata,
administration of
encabezado
the
en este
Democratic
caso
government,
por Joe Biden.
headed,
En
in
ese
this case, by
sentido,
Joe Biden.
hay que ver
So in that regard,
y
we
analizar
should
de
look
manera
and
concreta
analyze concretely
qué se ha hecho
what
en
has happened, what has
en
been
estos
done
últimos meses en las
over
cuales
the
el
last month
Partido
in which
Republicano,
the
encabezado
Republican
por Donald
Party,
Trump,
headed by
se ha
Donald Trump,
embarcado, es decir, ha dirigido
has
su mirada
addressed
llegar a
and
un acuerdo,
the issue of coming
solución
to an
que
agreement
sea
to
lo
reach a
más
solution,
para
which
esa
would be the most
guerra, esa
appropriate
confrontación
resolution of that
que
war,
desde
that
el
confrontation,
2022,
which
febrero 2022,
since February of
enfrentan
2022
a Rusia y a
sees
Ucrania.
Russia and
Rusia y
Ukraine
Ucrania, que en
at war
realidad
with
no es
each other,
Rusia y
Ukraine and
Ucrania,
Russia.
es
It's really not
Rusia
those two
y la
countries. It's
OTAN,
Russia
encabezada por
versus
Estados
NATO, headed
Unidos.
up by the United
En ese
States.
sentido,
So in that regard,
el encuentro
the
realizado desde
meeting
ya
carried out,
en Arabia
which
Saudita
was held in
entre
Saudi
Marco
Arabia
Rubio
between
y
Marco
Lavrov,
Rubio and
que
Lavrov,
son los
who are
encargados, los ministros de Relaciones
the
Exteriores
ministers
de
of foreign
Estados
relations
Unidos
or Secretary of
y
State of the
de
United
Rusia.
States,
Eso
and
ha
his Russian
marcado
counterpart.
todo
That
un
has
hito
established
en la
a
posible
real
solución al
turning point in the
conflicto. Aunque no se
possible
llegó a
solution of the
acuerdo
conflict.
definitivo,
No definitive
porque no se
agreements were reached
llegó a un
because
acuerdo, una posición clara
no
de qué se
clear
iba a
position
realizar.
was reached on
Sin
how this would be
embargo,
carried out.
eso
Nonetheless,
crea ya un
that
ambiente
has created an
de
environment
facilitar ya
to
una
facilitate
solución al
a
conflicto,
solution to the conflict,
porque ya la humanidad
because
estaba muy preocupada.
humanity is
Ya
really
en todo el
very
mundo,
concerned
lo que
throughout
se
the world.
creía era
Everyone
que
is
con esos
concerned of what was thought
bombardeos
was that
y
with the
esas
bombings and
amenazas
those
de
threats of
destrucción total
destruction, of
que
total
había entre esos
destruction,
dos países, entre
which were
Rusia
occurring between
y
Russia
Ucrania,
and
se
Ukraine,
podía desatar
what
una
could be
tercera
unleashed
guerra
would be
mundial.
a third
En
world
ese
war.
sentido,
So in that
ya
regard,
también la llamada que le hizo
uh,
Putin
also the
y
call
esa
between
comunicación abierta que han
Putin
tenido entre
and
Putin
President Trump, that
Trump,
open
eso ha
communication which has
creado
occurred, has
también
created
un
also
ambiente
an
de
environment
flexibilidad
of
y que
flexibility,
indican
and which
que hay
indicate
en
that
realidad
there
una
are
intención
there is in
de
reality an
llegar a un
intention
acuerdo
to
de
reach an
paz
agreement
y que
for
Ucrania
peace,
y
and
Rusia
Ukraine and Russia will have to decidedly move in the direction of signing a peace agreement. So likewise, in that regard, we also should look at the issue, besides the importance that those meetings have and that discussion which has occurred, that over these recent weeks, what has also occurred is the situation, there are a couple of key points which we should emphasize to see what's being done. What can be done to bring about this agreement? So we see, for example, this is the first contact between the United States and Russia after the war broke out in February of 22. This also of having discussions around peace in Ukraine also puts Zelenskyy in a very difficult situation. And also, the United States is also openly presenting itself as a mediator, an active mediator, so that that war can be brought to an end. That has awakened a situation in Europe of confrontation between the United States and some European countries, which still are persisting in continuing with the war and maintaining that confrontation between Russia and NATO, headed by the United States, which is no longer willing to continue with that confrontation, with that war. And in the case of Trump, Putin has always stated he is willing to come to a definitive solution to the conflict. But, for example, in the case of Trump, he read Zelenskyy, the Riot Act, at the White House. Another issue, which is a very active situation, is the situation in the Middle East. The situation that has been created with the disaster, the destruction, the massacre which Israel has carried out against the Palestinian people. That's another situation which has generated concern on a world scale and also rejection, because it's a situation which has been really calamitous, which has not been seen since the times of Nazism. And in this era of civilization, of advances in technology, and in which peoples and populations have a different level of understanding and consciousness, it's inconceivable that a country would be totally destroyed by another, and that the massacre would reach children, women, the elderly, the whole population. In this case, we believe that the Oasis plan of the Schiller Institute has to be reactivated. It has to be promoted in order to be able to reach a situation of a two-state solution with Palestine, and we have an Israeli state and a Palestinian state that can be maintained active and can live together peacefully. The Oasis plan would be that process of desalinating water, creating infrastructure to allow for those places, those locations which currently have arid soil, which are not now productive, to be able to carry out a process of desalinating seawater, also through ionization, atmospheric ionization, so that countries and areas that are in a difficult situation, that don't have water, that don't have agricultural production, that cannot develop, to have the possibility of developing an economy which would recover and which remain active. That Oasis plan, this has not been proposed just now. It actually goes back to the 1970s, when Lyndon LaRouche and Helga Zepp-LaRouche have presented this continuously since then, and they've held the banner high for the implementation of that process across the Middle East to allow for the recovery of those lands and to have development so that it also reaches that region, which over the recent years has been facing conflicts, which in this case could, in these most recent conflicts, could also generate a war which could be the prelude of a third world war as well. In this case, the Oasis Plan should be brought alive again. The Schiller Institute and all of us who are in support of peace, we should carry this forward as a banner, as a campaign to be able to advance so that humanity will have peace, tranquility, and progress. Thank you very much for providing me this opportunity to join you in this meeting, which is the 92nd meeting of the International Peace Coalition. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cabrera, for that overview and, your endorsement of the Oasis Plan. We very much appreciate that in your contribution to this discussion. I actually want to add one last thing to the discussion, and then we'll have some responses and back and forth. We have a video, which is part of a longer interview, but it was very, very, very important. It'll be published soon. This is from MK Bhadrakumar. He was a former Indian diplomat to the USSR and held leading positions in the Indian Foreign Ministry for over 30 years. So we definitely thank him for his contribution in video for the IPC today, and I'd like to play that now for.
Let me ask you about the opposition to this process. I was quite impressed by the fact that you referred to both Obama and Joe Biden. You used the phrase that they were guilty of, quote, wanton acts of motiveless malignity and hubris. Now that's quite a phrase. But what I'm interested in is to what extent you think there is a British hand behind those policies and in general those of the so-called deep state.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. It's not to what extent. It was an all-pervasive influence, the British influence on the American policy, and often, often I think from the American side they were led to believe, and Britain has the skill to get the Americans to believe that that it is their policy, but it is scripted and it is thought through first in London and handed over. It's almost like leading from the rear, And this is a consistent characteristic of British diplomacy. It's because you see, for Britain, the entire stature that it has in the world depends on its indispensability for the American policies and American foreign policy strategy. And therefore, you can see the centrality of it, in the British scheme of things. America is, United States is a global power. There are many countries, which are willing to work with it. But in the case of Britain, it's not like that. It's an obsessive thought, and this was very evident in the last weekend also. The panic that is there, and it's going to be a very major negative factor in the coming weeks and months, because the British intelligence is a stranglehold on the regime in Kiev. And now France has also joined there. So you see, I saw a commentary by CNN earlier today, discussing the possibility of the ouster of Zelenskyy. We are getting into these sensitive issues now, And British intelligence was doing a lot of havoc, because most of these acts of terrorism on Russian soil were actually planned by British intelligence. And the Russians knew that also. The missile attacks inside targets in Russia, assassination plots, such other things. So there's since yesterday there's been a talk that Ukrainian intelligence might have been involved in the second failed assassination attempt on President Trump, candidate Trump, during the campaign. Now, if there is, of course, this is something which has been, which was articulated by top senior Ukrainian politicians even at that time, that this is all a doing of these people. But who trained the Ukrainian intelligence? The Ukrainian intelligence is completely in the hands of MI6, and therefore, Britain's influence is not at all a positive factor in the situation today. It's one of the single biggest negative factor. Britain's capacity to be a spoiler. I think Trump would be interested in this. You can logically, Trump would be interested in this. The United States' main handicap. Why is it that its influence is steadily draining, and is losing its capacity in the region? It's a paradox, but Iran is actually the Americans' natural ally in that region, and the Iranian elite is again distinctly pro-Western, and that country is performing today much below its optimal level. It has a huge population, massive landmass, and powerful agriculture, well-developed agriculture, agricultural base, and if only it is allowed to bring out its LNG and gas to the world market, it's a huge reserve, So you see, it can be of use, and all these things become possible. But so long as that doesn't happen, how do you realize these dreams? They will remain on paper, this kind of thing, because I don't think any country there has got the kind of intellectual resources, absorption capacity for technology, and the national will and purpose in this way that Iran has. So Trump will certainly be attracted towards this if a engagement takes place. I strongly suggest that you should promote an engagement, a constructive engagement between the United States and Iran. And this would be, in some ways, I tell you, this would be even, I would say, as significant as the normalization of a Russian-American relationship. It will be in America's interests.
Thank you for your contribution. It was actually very, very interesting coming from a former diplomat and exposing just what this British hand has been. So I'm sure Garland Nixon, you'll probably take particular interest in that. Thank you. And actually, just to start off, a number of things. I want to ask Dennis if you could introduce Kirk Wiebe, because you are much closer friends with him than I, and bring him in for the discussion.
You're saying you want to go to Mr. Wiebe now?
Yeah, let's go to Mr. Wiebe.
All right. Well, Kirk Wiebe is National Security Agency. He and a team of people back in the year 2000 worked on something called Thin Thread, a kind of global surveillance which was, shall we say, more than co-opted by the then what should have been, let's say, criminal leadership of the National Security Agency. He and Bill Binney, Ed Loomis, Diane Rourke, and even Tom Drake, actually in a different way, were made the subject of serious and attempts to break them. They left the NSA in 2001, right after 9/11, and tried to point out not just improprieties, but downright criminal actions being taken within that agency. These were actions taken before, of course, the more famous actions that they later were taken by people like Ed Snowden. But Mr. Wiebe has, over the course of particularly the last 8 years, spoken various times on our Schiller Institute platforms and was here with us in New York, actually, about 3 years ago at the Teardrop Memorial, which was dedicated by the Russians. Spoke in Russian at that particular occasion. It was a Russian delegation that came to that meeting. It was particularly memorable. They very much appreciated it and has been very clear about the issue of peace and the problems of it. And so he also represents the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, a close friend of Ray McGovern and others. Mr. McGovern can't be with us today, and others, but Kirk is here with us, and that's all I think I need to say. So, Kirk, if you can unmute. We should be able to hear. We're not hearing you, though. We see you're unmuted on our screen. Yeah, we're not hearing you.
I know the fix here. I've had this happen where he sounds like a mouse before. I'm sorry. Kirk, you're gonna have to leave the meeting and rejoin. I apologize. We should have done a sound test, but yes.
Okay, so that means you have to leave and come back, Mr. NSA. That's pretty funny. So
That's happened before. I apologize. Sorry.
all right. Well, actually, while we're taking the minute for him to come back, let me just reference one thing for people who are here and I just may know the Schiller Institute as a result of being in the IPC. Today happens to be March 7th. March 7th is the anniversary of Bloody Sunday. That day in Selma, Alabama in 1965, 60 years ago, when various people were beaten on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, including the vice president of the Schiller Institute, the late Amelia Boynton Robinson. Ms. Robinson, who was born either in 1911 or 1905, as I always say, was the vice president of Schiller Institute for over 25 years. She was the lady who was beaten and left for dead on the bridge. And it's of relevance, I think, to what some of the remarks we've already heard about nonviolent direct action, particularly from Dr. Daoudi and his own journey from his revolutionary violence phase to the idea of dialogue on a higher level. But we like to just take the opportunity to recognize and commemorate Amelia. Perhaps we'll have a picture about her later we'll put up. But just wanted people to know that that's the case. And Kirk, you're back. Let's try it again.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, you're fine. You're coming.
All right. Thanks to Jose for saving me.
Okay.
Well, greetings to everyone in attendance. Let me make this quick. Helga led things off with pointing out what the goal of all of our activities are, and that is a new international security and economic development architecture. I firmly believe that the recent events of the last couple weeks set the stage to truly realize that goal. What have we seen? We have seen a tectonic shift in the position of the United States vis-a-vis Europe, Ukraine, and Russia. Trump, the deal maker, is setting the stage to create the environment required for progress to be made towards the goal that Helga so eloquently has described over many, many sessions and meetings. I join in Professor Cabrera's optimism, in Mohammed Daoudi's optimism, that Trump has a firm grasp on the helm of the ship. Now, Helga pointed out that the leaders of Europe were shocked, and they are shocked. But there's goodness in being shocked sometimes. Sometimes we need to wake up and get our heads out of the clouds and realize that change is in the making. I see Europe's reaction to Trump as somewhat emotional, not strategically well conceived or thought out. If one looks at the international landscape, not Europe, not Russia, not Ukraine, not United States, is prepared to go into full-scale warfare by any means, not economically, not militarily. All of our assets are stretched and thin. Europe would take weeks and maybe even months to get on a wartime footing. They're not ready for a conflict. Either are we, and Trump knows that. If you are not aware, the United States is in debt, $36 trillion. I repeat, $36 trillion. I don't know what GDP that equates to globally, maybe all the countries of the world. I don't know, but it's huge debt. And it's going to come due. And it will wreak havoc on the global economic picture in terms of inflation and other problems. So I would say that in order to add just a note of optimism, I believe Donald Trump will seize this opportunity and is seizing it to establish an environment of discussion, as Mohammed Daoudi was talking about. Once we get the emotions out of the way globally on this matter, wisdom can come forth. And I think wisdom will prevail. The realities will sink in. And we will see Europe, the United States, Russia, and Ukraine, and maybe others, at a table discussing future plans to stop the war, stop the bloodshed, and to give peace a chance in terms of the new international security and an economic development architecture that Helga has talked about so many times. And that's my assessment. That's where we're headed. I see this all as positive. It's uncomfortable for world leaders. Humans are always uncomfortable with change, but things will settle in and we will move forward. Dennis?
Thank you very much, Kirk. And I think we're just going to transition at this point. And so Helga, we'd ask, if you would have something to say both in response to Kirk and otherwise at this point.
Yes, first, hello, Bill. Good to see you again after some time. Well, I can only agree with you that, it's not weeks and months the Europeans will not be ready for war. It will be years. As a matter of fact, various intelligence estimates from Sweden, from Denmark, from Holland, from Germany, they all somehow out of the blue make up this figure by saying that Russia will be ready by 29 or maybe 2030 to have another major war on a country in Europe or maybe all of Europe. Now, there is not one iota of proof. It's an assumption to motivate the present rearmament policies. But if you try to look objectively to the policies of Russia, I have not found, and I have not seen a proof by anybody else, any inclination why it would be in Russia's interest to go that pathway to prepare now for a war in 29 or 30. It just is a complete lie. And I think it's really important, since you said that there will be room for debate again, which right now is very limited. I think it's really, I mean, people like, former members of the intelligence services like yourself, you can do a great favor to the world and the prospect of peace by analyzing, is that a realistic estimate? Is there any proof that Russia has such plans? Likewise, the accusation that China is trying to replace the United States as an imperial power, there is no proof of it whatsoever. As a matter of fact, if you look at the Chinese government and Chinese system, it's completely different than the West. That's admittedly. They say that they are communist. One can say, it's a very specific Chinese characteristics, communism, but it's much more 5,000 years of Chinese tradition, which has always been devoted more to the common good than to the individual freedom. Many features of what is being blasted now by the West as being so absolutely horrible, it's Chinese culture, and a culture which has served them well. Why do you think it is that Asia right now is thriving and the West is collapsing? At least the European part of it is in a free fall. And I think that we have really reached a point where we absolutely have to review what in the thinking of the West is still colonial. And it is, and the MI6 role was mentioned by both Mr. Badar Kumar as well as by Garland Nixon. And it is a fact, the British role in the instigation of this war has been absolutely undebatable. Boris Johnson ruining the Istanbul Agreement, Starmer going on, egging on Trump, sending more weapons and more far-reaching weapons. The role of the British is without any question for anybody who wants to see what is going on. And now, naturally, Macron offering the nuclear umbrella for all of Europe, which I think would not be a very good idea. Also, the idea of French troops into Ukraine. Isn't it amazing that the former colonial powers of the Sykes-Picot Treaty are now the major ones instigating the Ukraine war? So there is clearly a remnants of colonialism in the policies of these Europeans, and I know they would be absolutely arrogantly pushing this away, but unfortunately, I think this is something which needs to be discussed, because the 2x4 is really not my favorite instrument of dialogue, but sometimes it is necessary.
Okay. We're now into questions. We have a few written questions. I guess people have to raise their hand otherwise. But let me just check to see if there's anything from the people who've previously spoken. Dr. Daoudi, you have anything that you like to say at this point, or should we go right to questions? You're muted. Yeah, you have to unmute.
Yeah, if there are questions, I'll be glad to answer. I saw one question.
Yeah, should I read it? And now then,
yeah, please.
I'll read it so people can. Right. So the question that came in, which is from Marianne, Dr. Mohammed Daoudi spoke beautifully about his ideas for a two-state solution, His words are soothing but completely unrealistic. The Palestinians have for decades been the only ones who have made sacrifices for peace and continue to do so. They are the only ones honoring the ceasefire, not the Israelis. How can he make such proposals when the Israelis prove themselves to be completely untrustworthy? Also, the problem is, according to Norman Finkelstein, Ori Goldberg, and many others, at least 80% of Israelis support the mission of Israel, which is to expand Greater Israel from the Nile to Mesopotamia. I looked on Instagram to learn more about his organization and see nothing posted since 2019, and on Facebook only starting in February 2025, unless I'm mistaken. So that's what the entirety said. So go right ahead, response.
When we look at Israel or at the Palestinian, we have to see that there are extremists on both sides and there are moderates on both sides. There are peacemakers and there are warmongers on both sides. And that's why I promote the concept of when I was in South Africa and I was advising them. Also, I was in New York, and my message was, don't be pro one side or pro the other side, but rather be pro peace, pro reconciliation, and in this way you are pro both sides. And for instance, when we are talking about peace, it's not true that the Israelis, there are no politicians among the Israelis who are or civil rights, civil society leaders who are not for peace. At the same time, there are those who are extremists in Israel and are leading the government now, and there are also extremists on the other side, on the Palestinian side. So basically, what we want to do is to create a middle where people can meet, and that for both of them to work for peace, both of them. And for instance, you look at at today and you see all these ruins, but before that, before October 7th, these ruins were beautiful, one of the most beautiful cities in the world and in the region. And now it is ruins. The question is, what should I teach my children? Revenge, hate, or to teach them love, compassion, forgiveness? Let them look at the ruins, and I will teach them, I shall not hate, I will forgive, and I will move on. And in this way, let me build. Let us both have a united front against extremism, and to de-radicalize the society, because the society Hamas has radicalized the society to prepare it for war, and it did so and led to all this destruction. The same thing with the Israeli side. And so this is where we are thinking in terms of a future where we can have our children have a heart of flesh, not heart of stone. We do not want to teach them to jihadism and martyrdom and how to die. We want to teach them how to live, and that's more important than all the rhetoric that has been taken so far. And in this way, I believe that it is very important for us to take the emotions out and to think in terms of pragmatism and to think in terms of the day after. What is the day after? What do you want to have in the day after? Do you want to have anger, hatred, enmity? Or do you want to have peace and reconciliation, tolerance, coexistence? So that's the question we have to answer. And in this way, to work for what we believe in. I believe in peace. I'm working for peace despite all the odds. And I believe that one candle can light darkness. And then one candle can attract other candles. And this is the future we want. And this is the world we want. We want a world with light, not darkness.
We're going to pause here for a minute because there's an announcement from Anastasia.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Dejani, for that response. And we are going to be transitioning into the question and answer period with the audience. So the people who are on the Zoom, if you're also on Rumble or YouTube, you can register at the schillerinstitute.com. And on the top of the page, you'll find the RSVP link to get the Zoom link to hop on to be part of the discussion. You must be registered to participate in the discussion with the panelists. If you'd like to ask a question, just choose your raise hand option. We'll open that up and we'll go into that. If you just let me know, Dave, when we've cut the stream.